Hey, this is Juan Paredes, and I'm running for Florida's 26th Congressional District, and this is my economy and well-being gauntlet. So when it comes to student loan debt, it's a real shame in our society that we commodify even the most basic qualifiers and equalizers of our society. School is something that is called the great equalizer because it's supposed to provide education for even the most disadvantaged economically and for the disadvantaged socially. It allows people to understand what their rights are, what benefits them, and how to critically analyze data and parse information to understand what's true and what's false. In fact, our society, one of the great reasons for the economic boom in the 1960s was the GI Bill. After many soldiers came from World War II, they went straight into education. It was completely free, and it actually facilitated the civil rights movement. And it was one of the greatest times of our society. That backlash from the civil rights movement actually facilitated the elites in our country to scale back the free education that was provided for them in the past. The student loan debt in this country is a crisis that's unique to America and in developed nations. There's no other developed nations that have over $1 trillion student loan debt. In fact, most developed nations don't have any student loan debt. Germany provides free college for all of its citizens, and they would even provide free college for expats who aren't citizens of their country. If Germany can do it, we definitely can do it. So I support a full canceling of student loan debt. I think that the student loan debt is not money that we've paid, is not money that we've used. It's something that we're waiting to receive. So canceling it does not create inflation as many would scaremonger, and it would actually help a lot of lives in this country. So when it comes to taxes, the wealthy actually do not pay anywhere near their fair share in taxes. A lot of people like to say that the wealthy pay the most taxes in our society when it comes to other classes, but they actually pay the most nominally. If you look at the amount they pay percentage wise, they pay the lowest amount of taxes percentage wise than any other class in our society. This is because it is difficult to enforce tax laws due to the gutting of the IRS and their lack of resources. The best way for us to ensure that the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes is to enforce the IRS, to strengthen them, and also to consider new ways of taxing. Income is very easy to subvert and bypass, so there should be taxes on other things like capital gains and also wealth in general to equalize our society's income inequality. So now I want to talk about fair trade. A lot of these deals, when it comes to trade, the international bilateral deals are called free trade agreements. And I want to dispel that misconception right away. A lot of these agreements are not about free trade. When it comes to tariffs and these participating countries in these deals, tariffs are already very low, and the changes to the tariffs are marginal at best. A lot of these deals are actually investment protection rights or investor protection rights and intellectual property protection rights. So if you look at, for example, the TPP is designed to protect the United States intellectual property and their service industry when moving into East Asia as a competition to China. These deals were actually created within the neoliberal order after the fall of the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods system was a system created after World War II to create a international monetary and trade system that had the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. It was backed by gold at $35 an ounce. And the entire world would use the dollar as their valued currency, or the what they valued their currency as, while the dollar would value at $35 an ounce for gold. And this was actually difficult for countries to deal with deficits in their balance of payments. So the way the functional disequilibrium of the balance of payments within other countries. The United States dealt with this by having a deficit of their own balance of payments with the US dollar. that they compensated with their trade surplus. After the Marshall Plan, the United States trade surplus diminished as the trade surplus between Germany and Japan grew. So they could no longer sustain the Bretton Woods system, which eventually collapsed in 1973. After the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, the United States had a trade deficit and also had a government spending deficit. And they compensated for this by squeezing labor, lowering labor costs and making wages and labor stagnant, and also by creating personal credit to use the debt of regular people to pay for their deficits in both trade and government spending. This was in lieu of higher wages and in lieu of proper tax reform. So eventually, after the labor was squeezed and wages were brought down, consumption dropped. So they outsourced a lot of they purposely hollowed the manufacturing industry and outsourced it to a lot of lower wage countries like China, which then imported low price goods to compensate for the fact of low wages and increased consumption. And that allowed the United States to absorb a lot more surplus. But this is inevitably unsustainable, of course. And eventually it got to a point where it caused a lot of systemic contagion, financial contagion internationally, which exacerbated the 2008 financial collapse. So the fair trade agreements are just a way for the United States to protect their only lead in the international stage, which is their service and intellectual property monopolies, and they're not really fair trade. Trade has been they're not really free trade, is what I mean. Free trade has been happening for a long time. Tariffs are at an all-time low, and usually non-existent for the most part. If you look at Mexico and the United States, even before NAFTA. So these deals are actually investor protection rights, intellectual property protection rights, and TPP in particular was designed to allow individual international companies to challenge sovereign nations in an international tribunal. These deals actually inhibit free trade, actually then promote it. So I don't support any of neither NAFTA or the TPP. So when it comes to Social Security, our nation is actually aging at a fast rate. We still have the largest birth rates compared to other developed nations, which is about 2.5 children per capita, which is just marginally more than other developed nations. But our population is aging at a very fast rate. It's going to get to a point where there's going to actually be more older people in this country than there are young. And we have to have a pretty robust Social Security system to provide for these elderly. In our society, the elderly live at a very very constrained finances. Social Security is at $14,000 a year right now in our society, and it's extremely underfunded and looking to be cut nonstop by the GOP. This would endanger a lot of not only the elderly that exists now, but the elderly that's going to exist in the future. And as our society continues to age and the younger population diminishes in comparison, it's going to create a situation where the young people in our society can no longer be able to take care of the older people in our society. There's going to be far more older people in our society than there's going to be young. And we won't be able to take care of everyone by ourselves. There's going to be people who are going to be left out on their own entirely, with basically a pittance for their income. We're going to have to not only expand Social Security, but also the facilities that we have and the institutions we have to take care of our aging population. So my plan is to expand Social Security and also expand our institutions to be able to compensate for the aging population that we have in our society. Now I want to discuss the federal jobs guarantee. Now, to me, it's not so much important that we have a federal jobs guarantee if those jobs are not quality jobs. our society actually has a need for quality jobs that people can fulfill right now, especially if there's no other work that that's provided for them, or they have no other opportunities. We are living in a society that is rapidly warming through anthropomorphic climate change, and we have a lot of our infrastructure that is nowhere near to a level that can handle it. We need nuclear reactors. We need renewable resources. We need a smart infrastructure, a smart grid. All these things require labor, and and this is not just going to appear on its own. And companies are incentivized to continue because of to maximize their profits, to continue using oil for as long as they can. So the government spending is going to be crucial in facilitating the rapid change in our energy usage in our infrastructure, to prevent the largest damages from anthropomorphic climate change. To mitigate as much as possible, we need rapid reconstruction. And rapid reconstruction can come from having a federal jobs guarantee to ensure that we have the necessary labor power to create these new nuclear reactors, and to create these new sources of renewable energy, and to create this smart grid that can manage the energy that output that we have as a society. Our energy output is wasted a lot of the times, that people don't even use it, and it just gets wasted when it can be stored, or it can be used in a different sector of our country that isn't connected from one grid to another. A smart grid is vital to having a sustainable, renewable energy source. So all of this effort requires a certain amount of labor power, and a federal jobs guarantee can ensure that we have the labor necessary to have this rapid reconstruction. When it comes to free public colleges, I completely support making all public colleges free up until a master's degree, which is generally about 16 or so semesters. Having free college is essential to a society being educated. If education is very expensive, and a lot of people do not have proper education because they cannot afford having the tuition for the colleges, and also for the supplies for college. So it's vital for our society to have high skilled, highly educated labor force, to have a free college system. And most developed nations in the world have this system. For example, as I said previously, Germany has free college, not just for its citizens, but for even people who are non-citizens. France has free college for their citizens as well. We're the only nation in the world that does not provide any kind of free public college when it comes to developed nations. So it's not just a dysfunction of our society. This is the richest nation on earth. So it's completely abhorrent that that other nations can provide free education for their society, but we can't do the same. And it's not that we're incapable of it. It's that we lack the will, and we lack the politicians to make that political change. This is a political decision, not an economic one. We definitely have the resources to provide free college to everyone. And I don't mean having colleges like Harvard or Yale or private institutions. I'm talking about specifically public colleges. Those can be free. If you want to seek private education, which I think in a system like this would be redundant, you're more than happy to spend extra money to get that education. But when it comes to public colleges, not only do we need to make it free, we need to provide the best education possible for those institutions. So the Green New Deal is actually not quite a policy, but a set of ideas that are efficient to facilitate a net zero carbon emissions by or before 2050. Now, these ideas are actually very good. Some of those things are not particularly pertaining to the environment. For example, there are there are tax reforms and wage reforms in the Green New Deal, which I don't disagree with, but we have to be very specific about challenging the very catastrophic effects of anthropomorphic climate change, which is going to destroy a lot of cities and coastlines in our society. So it's very important that we specify exactly the challenges that we have to face here, because it's the largest existential threat that we face in the future. So when it comes to climate change and the Green New Deal, what I'm trying to achieve, or what I hope that we can achieve, is by getting carbon emissions cut be at half of 2010 levels by 2030, and then have a global zero emissions, carbon zero emissions by 2050. And I'm talking about globally. And we cannot reach zero emissions of carbon globally by 2050, which is what the IPCC recommends in their paper, in their research study, then it's going to be hard unless we can do some kind of carbon extraction to mitigate the effects of anthropomorphic climate change by 2100, which can see sea level rise at least 6 feet and basically submerge entire coastlines of cities, which would become uninhabitable. It would cause trillions of dollars of damage, and it would destroy the ecology that we have in a lot of these areas, and it would cause a lot of extinction. Half of the world's animals would be extinct, and 70% of the world's insects would be extinct. So it's an our benefit, and it's actually cost effective to to have massive reconstruction now, while we still have a chance to mitigate a lot of these damages, to prevent the global temperature from rising to 2 degrees Celsius and keep it at a 1.5 degrees Celsius, to mitigate the flooding, to mitigate sea level rising, and to prevent a lot of the extinctions that would happen around the globe. This is the goal set by the IPCC, and this is the goal that we have to strive for if we truly want to mitigate damages from anthropomorphic climate change. So now I want to talk about having a living wage in America. When it comes to a living wage, a lot of the conversation centers around $15 an hour for a federal minimum wage. And while I definitely agree with this goal, I think we should definitely proceed with caution. This is an increase in wages unprecedented and unseen before at this scale. I live in Florida, and we had a ballot measure recently that raised the entire state's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. And I definitely voted for that ballot measure. So I agree with the policy of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But we have to be very careful. We have to analyze the effects it has on the economy as a whole, which, like, it had very minor effects in employment, and also in the increase in prices when Seattle raised the minimum wage to $15. That is in a much smaller scale in a one particular city in our country. This is going to raise the federal minimum wage is going to raise to $15 an hour in the entire country, which is an increase at a scale that the world hasn't seen before when it comes to wages. So while it definitely is a lofty goal, it is something that we should realize, because wages have been stagnant since 1973 after the fall of the Bretton Woods system. Wages have been, labor has been squeezed, and wages have suffered because of it. Unions have been completely demolished, and workers have no bargaining power. So this is something that we have to do to allow people to have a prosperous life in our society. But even still, we should proceed with caution and make sure that we properly compensate for any issues that arise in the interim as we increase wages. And so just to add on, I am definitely 100% for raising the minimum wage at a federal level to $15 an hour. So now I want to talk about pro-union laws in America. Unions actually have had a very violent past in this country. When it comes to unions, they corporations have been stamping down on unions with a violent force for decades, even centuries, actually, until very recently. And even though they don't receive violent responses now, they're still met with extreme levels of hostility. Even recently, when Amazon workers tried to unionize in Alabama, the Amazon had a massive campaign to discourage the workers in that facility to vote no for unions, having posters in bathrooms, having compelled meetings every single day in the mornings with presentations talking about the damages that the union would cause to them, and without any response from the other side. And it basically killed the union effort that was trying to be organized by the workers. It limited their ability to educate workers, and also limited the ability to provide them with the exact benefits they'd have to their means of living, and how it will increase their wages, and how it will give them more bargaining power. Unions are vital for workers to be able to and maintain a certain standard of living, to maintain that they get the rights necessary that they need, to make sure that they have the right safety in their facilities that they work at, and the right protections they have for their benefits. So without unions, the United States is the only society or only developed nation in the world that doesn't have guaranteed maternity and paternity leave. I'm talking about guaranteed from the government. We don't have that, while every other developed nation does. Some developed nations have it for several months, and we don't even have, and we only have it, and it's not guaranteed by the government. But most corporations provide about a couple of weeks, even though it's not guaranteed, so that they can take that away at any point. And this is because workers have no bargaining power. They can't protect those benefits, because it's very simple for a corporation to just fire anyone who doesn't comply with their demands. Corporations and workers have a very different goals for their for or very different expectations when it comes to their benefits. Corporations benefit from having complete control, being able to fire workers as they see fit, being able to increase or decrease wages as their firms have surpluses or deficits. It's to their benefit to have as much control as possible, but then it's to the workers' detriment for employers to have that much control. They have vastly different outcomes, and vastly different means of needs for their or basic needs that need to be met. So the only way that workers can protect their benefits and make sure that they have a proper living wage is to have a strong union. And without having proper protections for workers to organize, having proper protections for workers to be able to create unions, and protections from retaliation by employers like Amazon had, well, when workers try to unionize in Alabama, it makes it almost impossible for you to form a union with a large enough corporation, which then puts you as a worker in detriment. So I fully support having pro-union protection rights, and would actually even support financial consequences, and possibly even legal consequences for corporations who do not respect the union protections that are put in place. And now, finally, I want to discuss breaking up monopolies. So there are actually large monopolies that control huge swaths of sectors in our society. For example, Amazon, they have a monopoly on the online market, which they leverage by having innovative products that are very popular be put on the website. They monitor which products get the most, which are the highest selling and get the most traction. Then they create their own version called Amazon Basics, and then price the competition out. And they can actually compensate for the deficit of the lower price by having investors fund that deficit. And Amazon actually hasn't been profitable until very recently, and Amazon doesn't need a profit because they actually have other sectors of industry, other sectors of the market, with not necessarily a monopoly, but a triopoly. So it comes to the cloud-based system, for example, which is controlled 33% by Amazon, 33% by Google, and 33% by Microsoft. So, and then Amazon also has other hardware services, hardware products, and then other services that help fund the deficits of the Amazon online store. And once the competition is pushed out, and since they also control the Amazon online store, they can put their products at the front page at the very top, and they can control who sees their product first. And once they push out their competition, they raise prices. And this is also done by Walmart before Amazon came around. This is called rent-seeking behavior. They behave in a way that isn't necessarily pushing innovation, but keeping away competition to be able to maintain a steady flow of capital and maximize their profits. These corporations then buy out other smaller companies that are competition for them as well, or companies that can further facilitate maximizing their profits, even though that would stratify another sector of the market. So we need to break up these companies. The Standard Oil back in 1920 was broken up long before it got to this point. Standard Oil only owned 80% of the oil market at the time and was still broken up by Teddy Roosevelt. And these companies that exist now are far more powerful and control far more vital aspects of our society. Google is another one. Google actually owns 90% of the search engine market, and it's a market that it's impossible for companies to be able to compete properly because it has an extremely high barrier of entry, and any companies that could compete are then pushed out by Google making certain services unaccessible to that competition, which people rely heavily on. So it would make it almost impossible for you to compete with Google in the search engine market. And then there's also YouTube, which is another sector of the market that is almost impossible to compete with, because everybody uses YouTube, and it has an extremely high barrier of entry. These companies and these companies weren't even started by Google; they were purchased by Google, and then the competition was phased out. And then now that there's no competition, they are trying to maximize their profit in a monopoly space, and using that profit to ensure that they don't have any competition in the future. And even Microsoft themselves, they own 90% of the software market when it comes to desktop computers and laptops. So the operating system that you use on your computer is probably most likely Windows. 10% of the market is Apple, with their Mac OS. And these companies, and since Microsoft is since since you have to buy hardware for you to have their operating system, Apple is not really a competition for Microsoft's Windows. Windows is the only operating system that you can get if you're going into a market to buy an operating system. The only operating system you can get for your computer is Windows. So these companies basically control their market sector, push out competition, they limit innovation, and then they use their privileged position to ensure that they don't have any more competition to maximize their profits. And this behavior is actually very damaging to the economy. It limits companies to be able to innovate new products. It incentivizes companies to actually limit innovation and also and create and basically create small updates and planned obsolescence. So that way they limit their costs and maximize their profits. So I definitely support breaking up companies like Amazon, breaking up companies like Google, breaking up companies like Microsoft, and breaking up companies like Apple.